How's it flying, guys? Lance Corporal Hawk 30 here, and before we get into the video at hand, there is something I need to share relating to the first video I reacted to from the Fat Electrician, that being his video on the Angels Airborne Division, the 11th Airborne Division. So, I'm going to try to keep it brief to give some background context before I get to my story, but I'm thinking this might give a few people goosebumps like it did me. So, first video I reacted to from the Fat Electrician was this video on the Angels, the 11th Airborne Division, which were the only airborne division in the Pacific, right? So, and, you know, it lined up to where the nuns at Los Baños internment camp were praying and basically were quoted as saying that they believed, as bad as things had gotten, that the only thing that could save them were if God sent the angels. And he did send angels. Just a little bit of a different breed of angel than they probably would have thought, but angels nonetheless. A little bit behind the scenes, I am technically monetized on YouTube. I don't really make money off of any of my reactions. It's certainly not enough to justify me trying to make this full-time. Okay? I'm technically monetized. I get a little bit, but nothing that's going to cut into anybody's bottom dollar. Like, at most, maybe $1 per video, if that. Right? Like, I only get my YouTube payout, as I'll call it, maybe once or twice a year. That's how little I make off of this. So this is a side hobby at this point in time. Unless I just get a massive following and massive revenue all of a sudden out of nowhere, this is going to be relegated to a hobby. But anyways, I was checking the stats on the video. I don't always worry about that, you know. But, it's kind of interesting to see how many people engage with something. And very promising. Over 1,000 people watched my reaction to the Fat Electrician's Angels video, which thank you so much to everybody that not only watched that, but also may have subscribed afterwards. And I'm looking at the figures, I go through all of it, and then I see the revenue. And took a screenshot so you guys could see. Up in the corner, $8.08. 808. And this is where the goosebumps come in. 808 was my grandfather's military service number. No joke. That was my grandfather's military service number. He was a corporal Marine in the Marine Corps during Vietnam. If I'm not mistaken, he was part of Force Recon. He would be the guy that they'd send out to deliver intel. And 808 was just his service number. He unfortunately would pass away in 2010 from cancer. Agent Orange was in effect. He was one of those unfortunate enough to have been exposed to that. Plus, he was stationed in Camp Lejeune for a time, so anybody seen that lawsuit floating around, whether online or through television ads? Well, after he died, my dad and Nana kind of started noticing 808 start popping up at interesting times. Like, my dad could be on the phone with my Nana, look at the clock and see, Mama, it's 808. Or he'd be looking for an address, and it'd be 808. Or he'd have to call a phone number with something, and just that number would keep popping up at interesting times whenever he would not be thinking about it, as if Papa was looking down and saying, I'm still here, son. And I have personally experienced this as well with him. When my Nana unfortunately died last year, the day of her funeral, we left the service, went and got something to eat, and we decided to head back to see how things looked after she'd been buried and after everybody had already gone. We pull up to the cemetery. As soon as me and my dad open the door, my sister in the back says, "Daddy, look at what time it is." We both looked. It was 8:08, right on the dot when we got back, and we weren't even paying attention to what time it was. My dad immediately laughed and just said, "There can't nobody tell me there ain't a God." Not with that timing. It's just something we were not paying attention to was the time. And of all the numbers I could have seen relating to my first reaction to the Fat Electrician, the fact that I got that number, I look and see 808 attached to that video, I don't know how to put it into words. I really don't. But it makes me feel like my papa's around somewhere. It makes me feel like Papa's giving me a little reminder saying that he's around for us. So, I just wanted to share that with you guys really quick before we got into this Fat Electrician reaction. And I hope you guys didn't skip. I know that that's something like, oh, please watch for it. Like, no. I really hope you guys saw this just because this is something that brought a smile to my face and gave me goosebumps. And I just don't know how else to put it into words. By the way, little disclaimer. Yes, my grandfather was the corporal in the family. He was a corporal in the Marines. That's not where I got my username from. The corporal. My username came from a nickname I was given in high school football to condense the story down. So, and I have nothing but respect to our men and women in the armed services. I will never claim to have served because it is not, I am not that kind of scumbag that's going to try to get cheap brownie points off of lies. I don't like doing that. I don't like people that do that. So I want to show respect to our actual men and women who did serve. And I apologize that we've gone on this long, but it's just a story relating to the first reaction to the Fat Electrician that I really, really wanted to share. That being said, this is still almost 8 minutes in. I need to get to this reaction. So, and it's the Fat Electrician's latest video. American pilot obliterates 5 enemy planes in 4 minutes. Edward Butch O'Hare. I know nothing about this individual other than what it says on the title. American pilot obliterates 5 planes in 4 minutes. So, much like many other Fat Electrician videos, pretty much any Fat Electrician videos that covers a historical figure, specifically individuals or teams, you know, this is going to be an interesting deep dive, I assume. It's 42 minutes, so this video is probably already going to be over an hour long, just because I like to pause and get my thoughts out, especially with something in the historical context like this is. As always, link to the original video will be in the description. Let me make my last check. Okay, there. Okay, volume in browser is all the way up. I know that was a criticism I'd received, and I was trying to make sure my computer, my overall desktop volume was increased from where the first couple of reactions were as well. So hopefully that's a lot better for you guys, a lot more balanced. I don't want it too loud, but what's too loud, you know? But it's close to being topped out. It's close to being topped out anyway, so that should come across loud and clear for you guys. Much more balanced than the first couple times. Anyways, link to the original video will be in the description. Please make sure you guys have seen it before you watch my reaction to it. With that out of the way, let us go ahead and go.
I hate it when I start researching for a video and the truth ends up getting in the way of a good story. Luckily, this is a good story regardless. Today we're talking about America's first naval ace of World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, Edward Butch O'Hare. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Delete Me.
Please don't.
Is that a CMMG Descent?
Come find out.
Guys, I gotta go. Well,
again?
Actually, hold on. What's it chambered in?
It's 300 blackout.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Nice. On to the tax
Sorry about
couch
that.
it
Anyways,
goes.
Delete Me is super straightforward. You give them money, they make sure that all your personal information isn't being sold on the internet by data brokers. You see, data brokers are legally required to stop selling your information if you submit an opt-out request. However, submitting an opt-out
I need to
request is
sign up
different
for this
every
because
different
I
data broker firm,
keep
and they make it as difficult as possible.
getting
And Delete Me does all of it for you
calls.
automatically. Then, after they do delete all your information from data brokers, they continue to monitor all of those data brokers in case your information does.
I just don't have the money to do it
they will
now.
Automatically take
Sadly.
it down again. I like Delete Me a lot. It's a service that I actually use. I also just got my wife signed up for it a couple of months ago. As you can see here, they checked for 142 different data brokers, and 80 of them had her personal information, and they show us what information that they had. So if you wanted to give it a try, we'll have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video.
Chapter 1, Easy Eddie.
Now, our
Okay.
story actually begins with his father. So, once upon a time in 1893,
Oh, really?
Edward Joseph O'Hare, EJ for short, was born in St. Louis, Missouri as the son of
All right.
two first-generation
EJ.
Americans that had just come over from Ireland. He spent his entire childhood in St. Louis.
Oh, a couple of the Irish lads and lasses, aren't we? By the way, anybody that gets pissed off if I'm doing an Irish accent, I have Irish ancestry. Feck off.
And then in 1912 he would meet his wife Selma. They would end up getting married, and then they would live in an apartment above a grocery store that was owned by Selma's father. Shortly after that, in 1914, Selma would give birth to their first child, Edward O'Hare, that would later come to be known as Butch. Butch would also get two little sisters, Marilyn and Patricia, and by all accounts they had a really happy little family. Okay, fast forward 1923, EJ takes the Missouri State Bar. He passes it, becomes a lawyer, and almost immediately gets this new client by the name of Owen P. Smith, and he is the commissioner of the Greyhound Racing Association for the entire nation. And he needs a lawyer because he needs to patent his new invention, that little electric rabbit that goes around the dog racing track that all the dogs chase. So EJ gets that done for him, and then Owen decides.
It's one of those things I know I've seen mainly in like an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where Bugs thinks the rabbit's real and is trying to follow and smooch her on her. But it's something I never really thought about, like, who made that? The more you know.
Decides that he wants to keep him around, so he makes him a business partner because he needs a good lawyer that's going to be able to help him keep dog tracks open and open up new dog tracks, because at this point in time, dog tracks received a ton of political resistance. And this is because in 1910, gambling got outlawed, so for the next decade, all the dog tracks were just going out of business, because without the gambling revenue coming in, the business just wasn't financially viable. And I mean, nobody wants to go just watch dogs run in a circle if you're not betting money on it, right? If so facto.
Yeah, at that point, I could just get a laser pointer and just... Dogs do that as well, folks. Don't ever be fooled that they don't. There are dogs that will absolutely do that. We had a dog when I was in elementary and middle school. I think we still had him all the way... Yeah, we had him from third grade, when I was in third grade, all the way up until I graduated. Zedicus. Yeah, what a name, right? Zedicus. He was exactly like a cat with a damn laser pointer. Just like... We had one of those multicolored disc... Not a disco ball, but it spun like one, like the multicolored lights, and he would try to chase those on the walls as close as he could get. It was funny.
So all the dog tracks ended up shutting down, except for the ones that were willing to engage in underground illegal gambling, which is why they needed a good lawyer like EJ. But before EJ even passed the bar and became a lawyer in 1923, things were already set into motion that would eventually change that. You see, 1920 was Prohibition, when the government banned alcohol. Okay, sidebar. The amount of videos that I have done on this channel and my other channel, The Fat Files, where everything ties back to Prohibition, is absolutely insane. It's like that game, you know, 6 Days of Kevin Bacon, where every single person on the planet knows Kevin Bacon within 6 relationships. I can do any historical event and tie it back to Prohibition somehow, in some way, in some fashion. I know it's possible.
Take a look at this.
Yes.
Christ, Charlie.
I mean, just off the top of my head from videos that I've already covered, Prohibition is directly responsible for Domino's not going bankrupt in 2012, every American warship having an ice cream machine on it, that time that America had multiple ships completely dedicated to just making ice cream and distributing it to the Pacific Theater in World War II. The fact that there's 7 billion pounds of cheese in underground caves all over America, the fact that every dairy farmer is required by law to pay into a giant advertising fund so that they can advertise milk, which is where Got Milk came from. Pretty much all the IRS codes regarding tax evasion, and now this story as well is also brought to you by Prohibition, that one time that the U.S. government tried to ban alcohol and failed miserably. Now, as we all know, after alcohol got banned, organized crime stepped in. They started distributing alcohol. They
Mr. Capone and gang.
Bootleggers. They manufactured their own booze, and they made a ton of money while they did it. And by 1925, they had gotten so wealthy and so powerful that they were actually able to buy off politicians and law enforcement.
Fun fact, that is why moonshine is illegal to make. No joke. The only reason that people get arrested for making moonshine at home and selling it is because that puts that they don't buddy the IRS into it. That is literally the only reason, is because they don't pay taxes on it. Literally, if the IRS got a cut of home moonshine sales, would not be criminalized. It really wouldn't be. Certainly not to the extent that it is. So, I know because I got a relative that... Anyways...
and they were able to get away with whatever they wanted, and they were looking for more ways to make even more money, whether it was legal or not. And one of the things they decided that they wanted to do was to get into gambling via dog racing tracks, and now that they had politicians on their payroll, they would actually be able to get the building permits, build all new dog racing tracks, and not be busted for gambling by the law enforcement because they were paying off them too. So you're a big-time mobster that wants to get involved in dog racing, money's not going to be an issue, getting building permits from politicians isn't going to be an issue, and the law enforcement's going to leave you alone.
Any
What's
names?
The last thing you need? You need somebody that knows how to run a dog racing track and one of those stupid electric rabbit things, right? Right. So that's what they do. The mobsters go and they get a hold of Owen Smith and his legal consigliere, E.J. O'Hare. And when I say mobsters, I just mean the first big-time guy to figure all this out and put the plan together, and that was a gentleman from Chicago by the name of Al Capone. Yeah, E.J. and...
I was wondering if this would somehow tie to Al Capone. Like, as soon as you said, but big mobster, like... First one most people think of is Al Capone. Is he related to this somehow? Maybe, maybe not. There were a few guys. Yeah, it was Al. Yeah, no wonder the...
and Owen are now partnered with Scarface.
Definitely looks suspicious.
Yeah.
That Southern Italian heritage raises some flags.
Using Capone's connections, they end up building dog tracks in Chicago, Miami, and Boston, and they make a ton of money. And this goes on for years, and E.J. ends up earning his new nickname from the mob, Easy Eddie. And back at the O'Hare house, they go from, doing pretty okay financially to being very wealthy very quickly. And despite E.J., Easy Eddie, dad, being in bed with the mafia and working with Al Capone, when he's back home, by all accounts, he is a terrific father to all three of his kids and a great husband to his wife. But
that's
Butch,
good, at
his
least.
son, is the absolute apple of his eye. They have a really special relationship. Using all this new money he has, he goes up, he takes him camping, teaches him how to shoot guns, and then he even gets into flying airplanes, loves taking Butch up into the airplane with him, and sometimes even letting him take control of the plane. And
so this is where our protagonist comes in.
And shooting guns. And this...
So our main protagonist is the son of a man who worked with the mob to enable illegal gambling. Great start!
It goes on for years, being a bad guy for a living and being a good dad back at home. So fast forward to 1927, Owen P. Smith ends up passing away. Now, since his business partner just passed away, he acquires the business and the patent to the electric rabbit. And this is where things get a little controversial, depending on which source you want to read. Some sources imply that he swindled Owen's widow out of the patent and out of the money, and some other sources say that he basically paid her out. Which, to be fair, both of those are completely possible. He is a crooked lawyer working for the mafia, and also it's pretty standard practice that if you are in a business partnership and your partner passes away, that you buy out his shares and you acquire the entire business. So,
I mean, if it's possible either way, he's 100% right. He's like crooked lawyer working with the mafia. Either one is plausible.
So you can go ahead and pick whichever one you like more for that. Now, it's also at this point in time, right around 1927, that Easy Eddie and his...
we obviously have no way of knowing for sure based off of his inference, unless that's proven and someone's gonna comment on it. But I'm gonna kind of lean towards he probably bought out the shares, because swindling it from the widow instead of just paying for the shares somewhat doesn't completely mesh with if him being a good dad and a good husband. To me, if that's the kind of person he is at home, maybe that would extend at least to that courtesy would extend to the wife of his business partner, the widow of his business partner, that he would at least pay for the shares. I obviously have no way of knowing, as he doesn't even know, but I'm hoping that's the case.
his wife Selma come to the realization that their son Butch is adapting a little bit too well to their new life of luxury. I mean, they have enough money to give their kids anything they want. The problem with Butch is all he wants is to sit in the house, read books, and eat donuts 3 times a day. He's 13 years old and he's already starting to get fat and kind of lazy, and one day he reaches peak laziness when he asks his mother at the age of 13, "Hey mom, can I borrow the car to go to the bakery?" The bakery is literally 4 doors down where he buys his donuts. He didn't want to walk like 60 feet to go get a box of donuts.
That is lazy.
At that point, his parents realized that they had a problem on their hands. So they do
yeah,
what
kinda.
parents would do. They come to him with love and compassion, and they hold his hand, and they look deeply into his eyes, and they tell him, "It's okay." I'm just fucking kidding. They sent his ass straight to military school.
Are you crazy? No way!
So he gets shipped off to Western Military
I haven't
Academy
seen
in
that movie
Illinois.
in
Fast
years.
forward 3 years, 1930, Butch is in his junior year of military school, and he absolutely loves it. He's not much for conventional sports like football or wrestling. However, he did end up joining the water polo team, which he really enjoyed, and that's actually how he got his nickname Butch. And he has decided not only does he enjoy military school, but he wants to go on to be in the actual military. He wants to go directly into the U.S. Naval Academy.
Good influence,
so that's what Butch is up to.
Very good
He's
influence.
still just raking in the dirty gambling money with Al Capone, so much so that in 1930 he buys a massive mansion that has an indoor skating rink and an indoor pool in this really fancy neighborhood in St. Louis. And this is the part where the truth kind of gets in the way of a good story, because when this story is usually told, there hasn't been all this context that I've already given you guys. It's literally just they open up like, hey, there was this lawyer that worked for the mafia and Al Capone. His name was Easy Eddie, and he was the best lawyer around, and he's the reason that Al Capone got kept out of prison, okay? Which, right out of the gate, that's not true, okay? Easy Eddie wasn't Al Capone's lawyer. He happened to be a lawyer that was a business associate.
That's
Capone,
right.
Okay, if Al Capone got arrested for a DUI or whatever, it wasn't like he was calling up Easy Eddie to come represent him in court. That never happened. They then go on to explain that him and his son Butch have this amazing relationship, and Butch is the apple of his eye, and he uses the wealth that he's accrued from working with the mafia to give his son everything he could possibly want. And then one day he has a change of heart and realizes that he hasn't given his son a good role model in life to look up to. And at that moment, he decided that he was going to help the IRS put Al Capone in prison, proving to his son how to be a good person, and then the mafia assassinates him for it. And then his son, having seen his father lay down his life to do the right thing, decides that he's going to go off and become a war hero in World War II, and it's this happy story about redemption and doing the right thing, and it's also completely fucking made up and nonsensical. Okay, that story sounds great if Butch is like a 7-year-old little boy. He's not. He's 17, and he's been in military school since he was 13, and he's already about to go into the U.S. Naval Academy, okay? Do you know how fucking mad I would be if my dad, that I had a great relationship with, like one of my best friends that I confided in at the age of 17, and he came to me and was like, "Son, I've done some pretty bad things in my life, and I've decided to prove to you how to be a good man. I'm gonna go ahead and turn myself in and get myself assassinated by the mob just to show you how to do the right thing." You know what I mean? Like, hey, dad, counteroffer, hear me out. What if you just retired, you're already rich, and then you just stopped doing bad stuff? That would set a pretty good example. I'm also 17, so I don't need you to just, like, set the example. I'm old enough and mature enough to understand the concept of, like, hey, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
You know? Maybe don't go get yourself killed basically for no reason.
This city wept. We lost 2 heroes. Who
wasn't even an awning in their direction.
No, I know.
Jumped 20 stories.
Doesn't make sense, does it?
So again, that's complete nonsense fairy tale land. Not only is it not historically supported,
Never seen that movie, by the
doesn't
way.
even make sense if you understand people even a little bit. Okay, so here's what actually happened. In 1930, Easy Eddie does
Give us
start
the
working
truth.
with the IRS because he's running all the dog tracks. He's helping Al Capone cook the books and basically launder all the money. And he's going to be able to show the IRS how he's doing it, which is going to be able to allow them to put Al Capone in prison for tax evasion. Now, from here, there's another myth that honestly I also don't buy, but basically they insinuate that Easy Eddie actually helped the feds put away Al Capone in exchange for guaranteeing that his son, Butch O'Hare, got into the U.S. Naval Academy. Okay, and again, I don't know where this myth came from. I don't know why people believe this. There's almost no historical evidence that supports it, and
simple reason. People like to come up with their own theories, even if they don't know. Oh, well, why could this person possibly have done it? They were involved with the mob. But he always worked here. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's more interesting. Some people just throw some random crap at the wall just because they think it sounds more interesting than what the truth probably is. The truth, sometimes, this is possible. This isn't. Sometimes the truth is amazing. Sometimes the truth is cool to learn about. You don't always have to make stuff up to make it interesting, but people will still do that, so.
And if you think about it, it doesn't even make sense, okay? The U.S. Naval Academy has like a 10 to 12% acceptance rate, and Butch O'Hare just spent the last 5 years in one of the most prestigious military academies in the United States, and he performed
looking
well
very dapper.
there. He's pretty much guaranteed a slot at the U.S. Naval Academy at this point.
Go.
And we know how he performed once he got into the U.S. Naval Academy, and there was nothing that even remotely suggested that he didn't belong there. So, if he was going to get in anyways, why on earth would Easy Eddie go get Al Capone turned in and get himself killed for no reason?
Yeah.
So what do I think happened? I think that it was 1930 and Elliot Ness and his crew of uncorruptible cops known as the Untouchables were going around.
Yeah, that probably was more likely.
Jail, and Al Capone was #1 on their list, and Easy Eddie, being the intelligent guy that he was, realized that if they got Al Capone, and then they would just start working their way down the ladder, and they would eventually get to him too. So he figured, hey, maybe I should help them get Al Capone, and then I'll get my own freedom instead. Now, in addition to this, to be fair to the myth that I did just try to debunk, it would not surprise me if there was some portion of this conversation where Easy Eddie was like, hey, I'm willing to be your guys' informant. My son is applying for the U.S. Naval Academy. If for some reason that it gets brought up that his dad is a famous mafia guy that works for Al Capone, and that is going to prevent him from getting in for that reason alone, I need you guys to tell them that I don't actually work for the mafia anymore, and I'm working for you as an informant. That way my son gets what he deserves. Okay, that is a very, very big difference between he got his son in by turning in Al Capone and he got out of his son's way.
A very, very important distinction. Also, that is the love of a father. It's like, hey, whatever mistakes I made, they are not on my son. Do not blame my son for things that I did. Good. That alone proves that he has good qualities as a dad. Maybe not in the legal side of things all the time, but as a dad, good on you.
While also saving his own skin, which was probably his primary goal to begin with. Regardless, Al Capone gets arrested and put in jail for tax evasion in 1931. Then in 1932, Butch sets off for the U.S. Naval Academy. While attending the academy, Butch does a great job and goes back home every chance he gets to hang out with his mom, his dad, and his 2 sisters. Now, right around this time, Easy Eddie and Selma end up getting a divorce, and Easy Eddie actually moves to Chicago so he can be closer to the racetrack that he's running. Okay, fast forward 1937, Butch graduates from the Naval Academy, and he decides that he wants to go off to become a pilot. Here's the problem. You can't just go off to become a pilot right after becoming a commissioned officer after graduating from the academy. You have to serve a minimum of 2 years in the Naval Surface Fleet.
Okay, he just mentioned that he was, he didn't mention previously, other than just now, that he was a commissioned officer, did he? We'll find out.
So he sets off to do that, serving his 2 years on the battleship, the USS New Mexico. So he does that for the next 2 years while Dad is back home.
I frequented using that ship in World of Warships.
Running the dog tracks in Chicago. Then 1939 rolls around. He's done his 2 years worth of time in the surface fleet. He applies to get into Naval Aviation School and he gets accepted. And right as he is about to ship off to go become a pilot, he receives word that his father has been murdered on November 8th, 1939. Easy Eddie had just left his office at the dog track in Chicago and was driving home. And when he pulled up to a stoplight, 2 armed gunmen got out with 12-gauge shotguns and opened fire on him inside of his car. And he tried to escape, but he was shot multiple times and ended up veering off and crashing into a light pole, and he would pass away almost immediately from his wounds. Now, technically, we don't actually know who killed Eddie. This is considered a cold case. However, pretty much everybody agrees that it was a mafia because he was assassinated approximately 1 week before Al Capone was set to get out of prison from the tax evasion charges that Eddie helped with in the first place. So everybody just kind of assumed that this was Al Capone's gift for getting out of prison.
Fair
now,
assumption.
going back to my original anger with the oversimplified version of this story from blogs and newspapers and magazines and other YouTube videos, when they tell the story, it's like Easy Eddie helps turn in Al Capone and then he is assassinated for it. They fail to mention that he's assassinated like 9 years later, okay, which I feel is kind of an important detail.
Yeah, kind of.
Butch takes emergency leave, he comes back home, he buries his father, and this is obviously extremely hard to do because that's his dad that died, but to make it even worse, the newspaper and the media is dragging his father and by extension his entire family completely through the mud. You gotta remember, this is the 1930s. The anti-mafia sentiment is at an all-time high, and because of this, the newspapers and the law enforcement hype anything up they possibly can to make the American public feel safer. They want them to feel like the war against organized crime is being won, and in this case, they hyped up Eddie to be something a lot more than he was.
Yeah, part of what perpetuated the anti-mafia sentiments, not that that's bad to be against the mafia, I just want to put that out there, but like a lot of pulps at the time and radio dramas really played up the significance of mob involvement in everyday life in certain aspects. The Shadow's a great example, where a lot of the things that the Shadow witnesses the mob do in his stories are based off of things that actually happened, because Walter B. Gibson, the man who was writing for the Shadow pulps, was previously a journalist who investigated mob activity. So a lot of the stuff you will read in those old Shadow pulp novels are based off of things that Walter B. Gibson actually saw happen, or actually discovered happen through his investigative journalism. You know, back when journalism was still journalism. I digress. The Shadow's good, by the way.
This is where the myth that Easy Eddie was the mastermind criminal genius lawyer that kept the entire mafia out of prison came from. That's how the media portrayed him after his death. And did Easy Eddie do some bad stuff? Yeah, absolutely. He enabled the mafia to make money from illegal gambling at dog racing tracks, and he made a bunch of money in the process as well. However, at no point was he the evil mastermind that was keeping Al Capone and all the mobsters out of jail.
No.
And having the newspapers vilify him to that degree was devastating to Butch and his family. I mean, yeah, he did some bad things, but he was a great dad to them, and from their perspective, he probably did those bad things to provide for his family. Whether that's right or wrong is a different conversation.
Yeah.
But to them, he was
not
still
touching
their
that
hero.
one entirely.
He was a great guy in their eyes. Not only did they have to deal with the emotional and mental stress of that, but they were also starting to get treated different by their community, because now the entire community was looking down on them, because Easy Eddie was apparently this evil criminal mastermind, and all the money they have and all the fancy cars and the big house was clearly blood money, and now nobody liked the family either. At this point in time, it would appear that the last name O'Hare was forever going to be associated with the mafia and looked down upon forever. Now, I don't know this for sure because Butch never wrote about it, so I can't truly know his intentions. However, putting myself in his situation, I have to assume that he felt like his dad was in fact a good guy that was driven to do bad things for the right reason. Being in Butch's shoes, that's his dad, it was his best friend, it was his hero. Realizing that his dad had done horrible things to put Butch in the advantageous position that he was in now, having gone through military school, having graduated the U.S. Naval Academy, and now being headed off to flight school, Butch couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. His dad had become a villain so that Butch had the opportunity to become a hero.
Now we're on to Butch.
So
that we're almost halfway through the video, and only now we're getting to chapter 2. That's how you know how important Eddie was to this story. That was very, very enlightening. Because, yeah, other than the name Al Capone, we really don't know. I think the casual person, the average individual, doesn't normally think about who all was involved in Al Capone's dealings other than, you know, Al Capone himself. But we know the name Al Capone. Also, before I forget, a couple weeks ago I went to saw Judas Priest and Sabaton perform live, and I saw someone wearing one of the Fat Electrician shirts, the one with that's It's Never War Crime the first time. Yeah, I saw that shirt. Great. I need to get my own.
So Butch does the only thing he can do. He goes back out to flight school. While there, he does okay in the classroom. He's not the best at taking written tests, but when it comes to actually getting Butch inside the planes, he is exceptional. He is one of the best pilots they've ever seen, and he's even better at gunnery. This guy can put rounds on target with his eyes closed. He graduates from flight school in May of 1940. Then he gets stationed on the USS Saratoga, an aircraft carrier with VF-3. Okay, now at this point, we got to remember it's early 1940. World War II has officially started, but America is not directly involved yet. That being said, pretty much everybody in the military is aware that America is going to be involved soon, and they are training extra hard to get ready for that, as well as training
as many
recruits as possible. So all of America's best
point.
warfighters at this point in time are pretty much sent in to go train as many new guys as possible, and the man in charge of VF-3 to get all these new guys trained up and ready for war is a legendary pilot by the name of John Thatch. And this man is a complete badass. He is basically Maverick from Top Gun, except in the 1930s and 40s.
Really?
This guy was training all the new guys that came through VF-3, and it was his standard practice to take the best, cockiest new pilots they had, and he would take them up in the air in F-4F Wildcats and have a mock dogfight with them, and he would allow the cocky new guy to get the advantageous position on him just to shake them off, get behind them, and shoot them down first. first, just to show them how good they're not. Just the complete dad energy of, we're going to set a tone right now out of the gate. You're not that good. You're going to shut up. You're going to listen to what I have to tell you, because it's the best chance you have at making it through this war that we have coming up. The dude is out there right now just breaking egos for a living, until one day there's a new pilot that shows up. He's not particularly cocky, but he's highly regarded as one of the best they have, and Thatch wants to take him up in the air just to see what he has, and he does what he always does. He lets them get the advantageous position, except this young pilot by the name of Butch O'Hare is so good that Thatch can't shake him. Now, Thatch is a better pilot overall, but O'Hare is so close in talent to Thatch that if Thatch does give up the tactical advantage, he's not able to recover. After seeing how incredibly talented Butch is, Thatch decides to take him under his wing and becomes his mentor. So they train a ton. It's that Yoda and Luke, the Mickey and Rocky type relationship. And one of the things that they start doing is they start trying to address the issues that they know they're going to run into once the war starts. And the big issue right off the bat is Japan's new fighter plane, the Mitsubishi Zero, that came out in 1940. It is faster and more maneuverable than the Grumman F4F Wildcats by a long shot.
And yet, as far as I'm aware, there's only like, what, one left? There's not many left in any case. But I know the only one in the US crash landed in Alaska. I remember my friend telling me this. Basically, the Japanese pilot didn't realize that there are kind of swampy-ish areas in Alaska, but it doesn't look swampy. So he went to go land, got stuck in the mud, and just did a head over heels, basically. And when the plane was recovered by the U.S., this thing's mostly intact. We could fix this thing up. We could get a pilot in here to see how this thing works, what it's good at doing and what it's bad at doing. And that's what happened. That's how the U.S. kind of learned, well, not kind of, basically started to figure out exactly what the weaknesses of the Zero were, because a pilot was given the opportunity to fly in the repaired plane. So, by the way, the Japanese pilot didn't make it. It's just immediate death upon flip. Did. But yeah, that's how we in the States learned it, was because one of our pilots got the chance to fly one and then observed all the issues it had. So.
Okay, this means not only does the Zero have the edge in combat, it also means that the F4F Wildcats can't really run away, because the Zeros will just chase them down and shoot them out of the sky. So Thatch, being the tactical genius that he is, realizes the only chance they're going to have is to fight. This situation is kind of like when he first met Butch and took him up into the sky. Thatch is a better pilot than Butch. However, if he was able to give up that small advantage, he wasn't able to recover. He needs to find whatever that small advantage is that the F4F Wildcat has over the Zero, so that he can enable his men to win. And what he comes up with is a tactic that would later come to be known as the Thatch Weave. It's basically a counterpunch, because he knows the Zeros are going to end up behind the Wildcats. They're faster.
Is that the tactic?
They're more maneuverable. Once a Wildcat has a Zero on its tail, another Wildcat's going to pull up next to it, and then they're going to cross paths, and then they're going to cross paths a second time, kind of like a zipper. And right as they're about to cross paths the second time, the wingman is directly lined up with the broadside of the enemy Zero, and he's going to be able to open fire without running the risk of shooting down his friend. So it looks good on paper, but obviously he's got to see if it works in real life, so he calls upon his protege, young Butch O'Hare, to go up with a bunch of other planes to be the bad guys and try to chase down him and his guys, where he can test the tactic. And it works out great. Butch was not able to shoot down any of them. The Thatch Weave would then be proven combat effective at the Battle of Midway, and it is still considered a viable dogfighting tactic to this day. During all this training, Butch would actually get some time off. He goes out, meets a young woman by the name of Rita, and on their very first date, he asked her to marry him, and she says yes, because Butch O'Hare doesn't miss. They then go to have a honeymoon in Hawaii. They come back, and they start living together in Coronado, California, while VF-3 is stationed at North Island Naval Center. And while he lived there, everything went great. He was training a ton, he was busy, but he did get to go home to his new wife every single night. And then one day, Thatch decided to make everybody in VF-3 come in for extra training on what appeared to be a random Sunday in December of 1941. And they did their training in the morning. Thatch cut everybody loose for lunch, and they were supposed to report back to finish training that night. And as Butch O'Hare was driving to his apartment to meet up with his wife for lunch, over the radio he would find out that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. He gets home, he tells his wife, and I quote, "The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. I'm to board the Saratoga as soon as possible." It's war. The very next day, the USS Saratoga and VF-3 set off from North Island to go participate in World War II. On their way there, the world would find out about Wake Island, where 450 Marines and 1,200 civilian construction workers fought off the Japanese on a small coral atoll that the Japanese wanted to use as a forward operational base. In the initial defense of Wake Island, the Marines and the construction workers were able to sink 2 destroyers and a submarine, repelling their entire force. And this is looked at as America's first victory over Japan, and it was a silver lining that the entire country looked to in the days after Pearl Harbor. Because of this, America would immediately send ships to reinforce Wake Island. However, the ships that were leaving Pearl Harbor had a humongous head start. Amongst the American ships making their way there was Butch O'Hare and the USS Saratoga, as well as the rest of VF-3. Unfortunately, the American leadership would come to the realization they were not going to be able to beat the Japanese there, and they didn't want to risk losing any more ships than they already had in Pearl Harbor, and they were ordered to back off and not try to save the Marines and the construction workers at Wake Island. After 2 weeks of fighting, the Marines and the construction workers were forced to surrender. Those that did not die in combat were either executed or held as POWs for the remainder of World War II. Because of how brutally the Japanese treated the civilian construction workers, the American government realized that they couldn't rely on civilian contractors to do all their construction on forward operational bases in the future. And this is where the Navy's construction battalion was originally founded, aka
the Seabees. Yeah, he did a video on that a while ago.
Workers that were at Wake Island are considered to be America's first honorary Seabees. During the same time, the USS Saratoga would be crippled by an enemy torpedo, and VF-3 would have to rotate and now be stationed on the USS Lexington. Once there, it is the Lexington's mission to penetrate deep into enemy territory so they can attack the port at Rabaul. They get like 450 miles away, and all of a sudden, a Japanese recon plane spots them. So they send some fighters up. Thatch himself shoots down this enemy recon plane. But he didn't get to him fast enough because they got that radio transmission out, and the Japanese bombers are already on the way to hit the USS Lexington. They start getting fighters all in the air as fast as they can as 9 Japanese G4M Betty bombers show up, and some of the fighters are already starting to engage the bombers, shooting them down. And Butch O'Hare is the last man slotted to get up in the air. He's sitting there on the flight deck in his Wildcat, fully fueled up, as the bombers are coming in, getting attacked by the other Wildcats, and he's just waiting his turn to get up in the air, hoping that the bombers don't make it and bomb the USS Lexington with him right on top of it in a fully fueled up aircraft. By the time Butch gets up in the air, the combat's basically over. The bombers have been repelled, and most of the Wildcats are still chasing them down, and they end up shooting down all of them. And then a second wave of bombers gets detected on radar, and this is a humongous problem. You see, all the Wildcats are up in the air, and most of them have been in the air so long that they're out of ammo and fuel, and once those planes return from chasing down that first wave, they're going to have to land. They're not going to be able to fight. By the time that second wave gets close, the only planes available with fuel and ammunition able to fight are Butch O'Hare and the guy that went up right before him, Duff DeFillo. So what do? They do the only thing they can do. Butch and Duff get next to each other, and they are about to engage 9 Japanese bombers in a double V formation, and Butch fires his guns just to make sure they're all working, standard procedure. Duff goes to fire his. All of them are jammed. So Duff's out. It is now Butch O'Hare versus an entire formation of Japanese bombers all by himself. He's already running low on fuel, and he only has enough ammunition for 10 3-second bursts with his guns. He does not have enough ammunition to take down all of these planes, and even if he did, he doesn't have the time to do it all by himself. He needs to be as accurate as humanly possible, and that's exactly what he does.
And he don't miss, does he?
Gunnery, he is engaging engines and fuel tanks, and that is it. On his first pass, he manages to knock 2 bombers out of the formation. He then immediately goes into a second pass, engaging the first bomber he sees on the other side of the formation, critically damaging it as well.
Is that footage from the actual engagement or another one and he just happened and that was just the closest thing he could find? I'm curious, was that from the actual engagement? I don't know how standard having a video camera on a fighter plane was at that time.
Forcing it to drop its bombs early and peel away. He then engages the next bomber next to it, striking the fuel tank, causing it to blow up in midair. He immediately goes into his third pass, shooting down another 2 bombers before making his 4th pass, engaging another one. And while this is happening, the crew of the USS Lexington is just watching in awe as it unfolds before them. The admiral on board said, and I quote, "All of us on the flight deck and the bridges became so intent watching the aerial battle that it was hard for us to concentrate on our duties. At the time, the entire ship's company burst into cheers as our fighter shot the bombers down into the sea. It was not as though they were in the midst of a life or death struggle, but at a baseball game." After his 4th pass, Butch was completely out of ammunition and almost out of fuel. The 4 remaining Japanese planes dropped their bombs, and all of them missed.
All right!
Yes!
So hard.
In the span of 4 minutes, Butch O'Hare had pulled off the impossible,
Good clip
going
to use.
toe-to-toe with an entire Japanese bombing formation, and during that time, he was everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. The entire bombing formation, returning fire on Butch, managed to hit him with a total of 1 bullet. Butch was engaging the enemy so quickly from so many different angles that one of the surviving Japanese pilots said, and I quote, "Enemy planes swirled around us, zooming, banking, diving, attacking us from all directions," not realizing that it was one man.
It was one man.
Maybe
One man.
So the 4 remaining Japanese planes had dropped their bombs and missed. They peel off, they retreat. Butch goes to land, and as he goes to land, he drops his landing gear, and some new guy on the deck opens fire on him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Luckily, it was all misses. Butch gets out of his Wildcat, walks up to the guy that was just shooting at him. It's some new kid that is now just shitting his pants because he almost just killed the hero
understandably.
of the day. And Butch walks up completely cool, and he's like, "Son, I don't mind if you shoot at me. Just try not to do it with my landing gears down." Which is probably the politest way of calling this kid an idiot to his face imaginable, considering that he just shot at him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Like, hey kid, if a plane has its landing gear down and you're on an aircraft carrier, it's probably trying to land on you, meaning it's not an enemy. Why would you shoot at me? Okay, now that the immediate threat is over, this has been like 30 minutes of straight chaos. We've got to figure out what all happened, where everybody's at, if they're okay. We have to get the planes ready in case there is another attack. There's a lot of stuff to do. So Butch, all the other pilots, and pretty much everybody else that would have seen anything goes in to get debriefed so the chain of command can try to figure out what all happened in this very busy couple of minutes. So Butch goes in and says, you know, I shot up 7 of those planes really good. I'm pretty sure I downed 6 of them. To which the captain of the USS Lexington is like, actually, I'm gonna go ahead and only credit you with 5 because after you pulled off after your last run, there was still 4 bombers in the air that dropped their bombs, and there was originally 9 to begin with. I do think that you shot down the other 5 though, because, well, pretty much everybody saw it happen. So now Butch has officially been credited with downing 5 enemy planes. This makes him an ace pilot, and the...
Is that Felix the cat on that plane? That looks like Felix the cat from this angle. I think. Like, almost like Felix the cat on a broomstick or something. I can't completely tell, but it looks like Felix the cat from this angle.
First naval aviator ace of World War II. And at first, Butch doesn't think anything of it. He doesn't regard himself as being special. He doesn't think what he did was incredible. He thought he did exactly what anyone else
soloed that team
would have done if they were in the exact same situation. As far as Butch O'Hare is concerned, the only thing about that day that was unique to him was that he happened to be in the right place at the right time. He wasn't necessarily the right guy. And then he came out of getting debriefed, and the crew of the USS Lexington had already went down to the machine shop and made him a trophy. He was everybody's best friend. He was the hero of the day that had saved the USS Lexington, and everybody was in love with Butch O'Hare.
Yeah, he saved them.
The crew of the USS Lexington and the rest of VF3 actually adopted a new drinking song that night as well. It goes something along the lines of, O'Hare, O'Hare, did the Japanese bombers go? O'Hare, O'Hare, could they be? Okay, now sidebar, in the spirit of full disclosure, retroactively after World War II, it has been decided that Butch O'Hare actually only shot down 3 enemy bombers on that day. Apparently this is because the Japanese documented that actually only 3 planes were shot down during that wave, 3 of them returned back severely shot up, and 1 of them apparently got lost in a storm.
You sure about that?
Okay.
And we're trusting that? Why exactly? If I'm wasn't it the old 666 video where they were surrounded by zeros and they shot down X amount of planes, but they were retroactively only credited with the with a smaller amount of planes because the Japanese government said, well, only a few were lost. It's like, no, dude, the planes that returned had a lot more bullet holes than I can't remember, but it's in the Eager Beavers video. It's in the old 666 video. I remember that much. I can't remember the details right now off the top of my head.
And this is where I get annoyed, because on one hand, like, yeah, okay, I understand wanting to figure out the truth and clarify things, but also I feel like Americans typically tend to believe what the enemy says happened more than they believe the word of their own men. I mean, when the captain of the USS Lexington looks up in the sky and he's like, 1, 2, 3, there's 4 left, the rest were shot down.
Yeah,
I don't know
exactly.
why we're not believing that guy. Why are we believing the Japanese documentation over that. And don't get me wrong, I understand that people make mistakes and maybe the captain miscounted. Maybe the entire crew that was also watching had a bad
an
account
entire
what
crew
happened,
of
you know?
witnesses.
Because the enemy never ever makes mistakes, just like the enemy that was under the impression that he was getting attacked by multiple planes all at once and they were everywhere all over the place, when in reality it was just Butch up there by himself. Okay, and I know this is crazy and I'm definitely biased, but I'm always going to be more inclined to believe the guys on my team than the enemy. But hey, whatever. I'm not the expert. That's one thing. Whatever. Maybe everybody on the USS Lexington miscounted and the Japanese counted right. I guess that is possible. However, I will argue till I die that the Japanese pilot that got shot up by Butch O'Hare and then magically got lost in a storm that none of the other shot up planes managed to get lost in absolutely got shot down by Butch O'Hare. Okay, I don't care if the storm did the last 5% of the damage. Butch should get credit for that. Okay,
absolutely.
It's lunacy to say anything other than that. I mean, for real, apply this logic to any other situation. Imagine that you're at a party and there's an altercation that breaks out between guy A and guy B, and guy A pulls out a gun, shoots guy B in the chest 17 times, and then guy B falls into the pool. Okay, are we gonna be like, oh, that guy drowned? No, guy A killed guy B. Okay,
exactly.
that's obvious. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. I get super annoyed when there's some people that have nothing better to do with their lives and look back and retroactively nitpick and try to undermine the accomplishments of others. Honestly, Butch O'Hare probably wouldn't even care this much because all he cared about was saving his dudes. But also, he's a better man than I am.
What is it with people's obsession in doing that shit? You know, it's like when he was it the Ramage video where he talked about. There's always going to be somebody in brass that tries to go, actually.
So, whatever, moving on. Anyway, so over the next couple of days, things kind of return to normal-ish. However, the USS Lexington is still on mission. They're still making their way to Rabaul so they can attack this port. And then once they get there, they start launching raids. Now, Butch is pumped. He wants to get back up in the air. He wants more combat. That's what he's here for, right? However, it gets decided by Thatch that Butch and Duff are to stay at the USS Lexington while everybody else goes out and conducts raids. And the theory behind that was, or at least the stated theory as to what Thatch told O'Hare was, hey, we're leaving you guys to defend it because we know if everything goes bad, you two by yourselves can defend the USS Lexington against anything. That's what Thatch told him. In reality, Thatch knew that Butch O'Hare was being put up for the Medal of Honor, and so did the rest of the chain of command, and they knew that they could not afford to let Butch get killed in combat. Okay, this is early 1942. This is 2 months after Pearl Harbor. The only silver lining, the only good news that America has gotten in the past 90 days was about the Marines and the construction workers making their last stand at Wake Island. And now they've all been captured, either killed or put in internment camps. Okay, America has not had any good news, except now they have the story of Butch O'Hare, the man that became an ace in 4 minutes. Shortly after this,
that
Butch
one
is
makes
informed that
sense.
he's going to be receiving the Medal of Honor, to which he directly tells Thatch, I don't want it. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want to have to go back stateside. He wants to stay out there with his men. He still does not feel as though he did anything special. And the man that has been his father figure, his mentor for the past couple of years, basically pats Butch on the shoulder and informs him, too bad. Deal with it. You're a hero now. Now you got to go do that, because that's ultimately what's going to be the best for this war effort. And with that, Butch is sent back home stateside, where there is both a literal parade for him when he arrives, and he is then metaphorically paraded around the country, conducting interviews, doing anything he can to boost the morale of the American people and the military in the wake
get
of
back
Pearl
into
Harbor.
duty,
During this
I
metaphorical
assume.
parade, he makes his way to the White House, where he is awarded the Medal of Honor by FDR, and his very own wife, Rita, is the one that gets to put it around his neck. And all of this is because he was just some fat kid from St. Louis that wanted some donuts, but also didn't want to walk very far to get them. And honestly, he's still that fat kid at heart. He's never been the star athlete. He's never had everybody looking at him. He's never stood in the spotlight for this long. And during this time, he is described as modest, humorous, inarticulate, very nice, and more than a little embarrassed by the entire affair. So he gets paraded around the country helping to sell war bonds.
I mean, the dude's being put on a pedestal and then marched all around, like basically being driven by everybody. Like, hey, look at our golden boy. Look at our golden boy. He's a big hero. Like, he's getting paraded around in a way that he was not intending on being paraded around. Yeah, I'd say embarrassed kind of covers it. But yeah, like, Applauds for Butch.
Until about June of 1942. Then VF-3 is actually set to come back to Hawaii for some R&R. And while there, VF-3's commander, John Thatch, is set to get a promotion and move on and advance his naval career. And he is going to be replaced by none other than his protege and war hero, Butch O'Hare. On June 19th, 1942, Butch O'Hare formally relieves John Thatch of command of VF-3 as he assumes command himself. John Thatch would then go on to say, and I quote, "I know of no one I would rather see take my old command into new battles." Of course, referring to Butch O'Hare, and this meant more to Butch than winning the Medal of Honor.
I imagine. Chapter 3. Oh.
Unfortunately, this did not mean that Butch was going to get to go back into combat. VF-3 had actually been taken, and they are now going to be training all of the new pilots to get ready for war, because America's practice at this point in time was to save all of our best pilots and make them teachers to train the next generation, as opposed to the Japanese who, well, they used up all their good pilots. So Butch and the remaining combat veterans of VF-3 start training a bunch of new guys, and Butch officially becomes... This did not mean that Butch was going to get to go back into combat. VF-3 had actually been taken, and they are now was to save all of our best pilots and make them teachers to train the next generation, as opposed to the Japanese who, well, they used up all their good pilots.
They all died.
So Butch and the remaining combat veterans of VF-3 start training a bunch of new guys, and Butch officially becomes known as the King of Maui. Because, I mean, he's the war hero. Everybody knows
he's getting
his name.
titles
He's
on
training
titles,
all the new
man.
guys. He's in charge. This guy is clearly the main character. And this is an important time because he's training the next generation of fighter pilots that he'll eventually take into combat, but he also gets to go home every night and spend time with his wife. And during this period, they end up having their daughter, Kathleen, that he gets to meet in March of 1943. With Butch leading all the training, VF-3 became known as Butch's Boys, and a lot of these pilots went on to become aces themselves, and they all had incredible things to say about Butch and the lessons that he was able to pass on to them. Then in August of 1943, VF-3 was reinstated as VF-6, and they were being stationed on the USS Independence, and they were being sent back into the Pacific Theater for combat. But unlike last time, Butch isn't going to have a plane that's outmatched by Japanese Zeros, because him and his men are not getting Wildcats. They're getting the new Grumman F-6F Hellcat. And I cannot stress enough what a big difference this is. The Wildcat is outmatched by Japanese planes. The Hellcat, on the other hand, will go on throughout the rest of World War II to rack up a 19-to-1 kill ratio. And now Butch and his boys got the new Hellcats, and they proceed to go and fuck shit up. First thing they do is they go and they launch raids on Wake Island and Marcus Island. Butch lands a couple of more air-to-air kills, solidifying his status as an ace, even if people like to go back in time and try to discredit some of his kills. Then VF-6, now VF-3, gets restationed onto the USS Enterprise, and Butch, the war hero, gets put in charge of all 3 squadrons on the USS Enterprise. Okay, here's the problem with that. Butch is now officially a bigwig. He's not supposed to be out there in a Hellcat mixing it up with the enemy anymore. He's supposed to be going up in like a Grumman Avenger, you know, a command plane, so he can see everything, see what's going on, be protected, be safe, be the smart guy up in the tower telling the troops on the ground what to do. Okay, but that's not how Butch gets down, okay? He officially puts in a request that they repaint his Hellcat so that it can be his command and control vehicle, and he's gonna do everything from a Hellcat. And obviously, this is Butch O'Hare, the war hero and fighter ace. He's gonna get what he wants, and he does just that. Now with Butch O'Hare in charge of over 100 pilots on the USS Enterprise, they go and provide air support to the Marine Corps as they make amphibious landings at Tarawa and Macon Island. And with the help of the new Hellcats, they absolutely crush the Japanese in daytime combat, so bad that the Japanese have to ditch the idea altogether. After the Japanese realize they can no longer go toe-to-toe with the American aviators during daylight, they resort to using night tactics. Basically, the Japanese resort to sending torpedo bombers out in the dark of night, launching torpedoes and hoping they hit American ships. Now, it's not super effective because the torpedo bombers can't really aim. However, it's also effective in that the Americans also can't really send planes up to stop them because night fighting at this point in time isn't really a thing. Okay, you gotta realize this is 1943. Radars are still fairly new technology, and they're mostly being used on ground arrays, and recently they're starting to be used on big naval vessels. They can't cram one of these things inside of a fighter plane yet. So at best, all the Americans can do is use the radar on the ship to see the enemies coming and then essentially brace for impact. They are not going to be able to scramble their own fighters to go up without a radar because everything's relative up there, right? Even if the ship tried to tell the planes where the enemy was, like, is that my left or your left? Is that my guy or is that an enemy? They'd end up shooting more of themselves down than they would the enemy. It'd be
that makes sense why they
so
wouldn't
that's really
proceed.
all the Americans can do is just hope they miss. That was until Butch came up with a plan. What if we took the Avenger, it's a big plane, we crammed a radar into that, and then sent the Avenger up with a bunch of Hellcats, and then as long as we could stay in formation, we would be able to tell in relation to ourselves where the enemy was. The Avenger could be like the enemies to the left, the enemies to the right, and everybody has the same left, the same right. The Avenger could guide everybody. Now, obviously, if the entire thing devolves into a giant dogfight, we're going to have a huge issue, but we should be able to ambush them under the cover of night and stay in formation and hopefully not lose it. And we don't need to go chasing kills. We just need to prevent them from launching torpedoes at the ship. We just need to either shoot them down while maintaining our formation,
or scare them off.
We just need to scare them off. So
yeah, exactly.
Permission from the chain of command. They shove a radar inside of a Grumman Avenger, and now he starts developing night fighting tactics, and his crew becomes known as the Black Panthers. So in November 1943, they go up for their first night mission, attempting to intercept Japanese bombers. They were unable to find the Japanese bombers at night. However, they didn't get to shoot off their torpedoes, and they got all the planes back on the carrier under the cover of night. So it was deemed a pretty big success. Then November 27th, 1943, they go up for their second night mission. There's 2 Avengers and 4 Hellcats divided into 2 different groups, and they are going to go up there and stop the Japanese bombers. By the time all the American planes get up in the air, the Japanese bombers are so close that the Avengers are having trouble differentiating the radar signatures between the Japanese bombers and the American Hellcats. And before Butch and his wingman can actually find their Avenger and get into formation, Butch's Avenger actually runs into the Japanese bombers first and opens fire. Even though it's not a fighter, it does have some guns, but it's not a lot. Regardless, they're able to shoot down one of the Japanese bombers. And then Butch's Avenger again somehow runs into another Japanese bomber before finding Butch and the wingman.
It's like he's running into targets.
At this point, it's chaos. There's multiple planes in the air, American and Japanese, and they're in close proximity, and they don't know who is who. So Butch instructs his wingman and the Avenger to both turn on their cabin lights at the same time, so all 3 of them can see each other for a brief moment and be able to get into formation. So they turn the cab lights on for a brief second, they all see each other, then they turn them back off right away. At this point, the crew of the Avenger spots a Japanese bomber above Butch approaching him from the rear, most likely attempting to shoot him down. They radio to Butch that he has somebody on his tail, and they radio to the other Hellcat to send them forward to take out the bomber. Butch's wingman in the Hellcat speeds up, intercepts the bomber, opens fire, and the bomber opens fire on Butch. The bomber takes heavy damage and veers off into the darkness, at which point the crew and the Avenger radios, "Butch, we got him. Butch, we got him. Come in. Over." And there's nothing. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but it is believed that the bombing crew got a lucky shot off that pierced Butch's canopy, killing him directly without heavily damaging his plane. It is the only thing that would explain why he didn't radio that he had been hit. Despite extraordinary efforts, his remains were never recovered, and he was declared dead 1 year later. In addition to Butch O'Hare, 6 more American pilots would give their lives conducting carrier-based night operations during World War II, utilizing the techniques that Butch O'Hare had helped develop. Those missions are credited with downing 103 Japanese planes that otherwise would have been able to attack defenseless American ships. Butch not only saved lives through his direct actions in combat, but through his expert training of the next generation of naval aviators in World War II, and his help developing groundbreaking techniques like the thatch weave and carrier-based night combat. In conclusion, this is why the airport in Chicago is known as O'Hare International Airport.
I was wondering that earlier.
It's named after a famous man named Edward O'Hare. And no, not the famous mafia lawyer that had ties to Al Capone and was famously assassinated, but rather his son, the man that overcame the sins of his father to become one of the greatest war heroes in American history. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Whack bang, out.
Man, I know there's more. Man, dude, I got so invested at that part. Oh, man.
Lieutenant O'Hara, tell us about what happened in the Pacific that February afternoon.
We were out there and we ran into a bunch of these Jap bombers. And we think we did pretty good with them.
Are you thinking of yourself or hitting the other fellow?
Well, you don't have much time to think about yourself. The main thing you worry about is whether you can stop them before they get to your ship, because if you don't, why, you won't have any place to go when you do finish up.
My ears are so sweaty. Man, that... He was so... The first comment is pinned by the fat electrician. He said, "I'm not crying. My office was hot. My eyes got sweaty." Of course. Oh, man. And in the next comment, one of the next comments underneath says, "We recently lost a national treasure. Brigadier General Clarence Bud Anderson passed away at the age of 102, a triple ace in his P-51 Mustang Old Crow. This gentleman not only served during World War II, but Vietnam as well. He was also a test pilot." Excellent video. Please keep them coming. Man. But yeah, that's... See, I knew this was going to drag on past an hour. but knowing that somebody got a lucky shot off of Butch and they never found what happened to him. Man, like... And I can't remember, was he in his Avenger? Wouldn't he have had a wingman? But maybe he was flying. I'm guessing he must have been flying solo. So that's the only thing that makes sense. He had to have been flying solo during that round. Otherwise, whoever his wingman would have taken over. But man. Alright. That got me invested only to... That electrician's doing a good job of building up suspense, building up the excitement only to kill it off. It's like, by the way, it's like, yeah, we got him, Butch. Butch, you there? Right in the heart, man. Stuff. At least he got to know his daughter a bit before he died. I don't know how long it was of a period, but I imagine a few months. But it's still, that's so sad that that little girl, that baby, didn't get to grow up with her dad being there for her for past the first few months or year, however long it was. She didn't get to know her dad as she got older. Like my niece, her dad died 10 days after she was born, and she only knows him through pictures and old videos. So, but she recognizes his picture, saying, "That's my daddy." It breaks my heart seeing that, but the fact that she recognizes that's my daddy, it gives me sad smiles. And I kind of get a similar feeling with this a little bit, but the disconnect is I didn't know this individual personally, obviously. I wasn't born until like 50 years after his death, at least. But that was a very educational video. All of his videos are educational, but this is an entertaining kind of educational. Like, his mastery over storytelling has grown... There's a damn mosquito around here somewhere. His mastery of storytelling, the Fat Electrician's mastery of storytelling, has only grown more and more as the years have gone on. And just... I would love for this guy to tell more stories. Like, maybe he could do a video about the person mentioned in the comments section about Brigadier General Clarence Bud Anderson, being timely in that the man has passed. So, one of the comments says, those write-offs are pretty sweet props. Yeah. Oh, man. But, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because it is getting hot in here. I'm actually sweating under this shirt. I need to turn the AC on. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like if you enjoyed, comment what your favorite part of this story was, thoughts on the dad and what you think, all those options that Fat Electrician, that Nick brought up as possibilities in some of those scenarios, or what do you think of Butch? What do you think of the retroactively changing the numbers just because the people you were fighting against said, well, actually, they didn't do as good as they said they did. Which is bull. Subscribe if you're new, and tap the bell to get notified whenever I upload a video, so you don't miss any reactions, gameplay, or otherwise from me. Also, go check out my Discord. Link is in the description. Come join me. We'll talk, post memes, songs, videos, artwork. You can self-promote your own stuff and just have some fun. This has been Lance Hawk 30, signing off.